What was the Orlando shooter's intention, jihad or anti-gay hate crime? And why does it matter? Counterterrorism expert and author of Defeating Jihad, Dr. SEBASTIAN GORKA will tell us. And finally, Pope Francis spoke out this week on the validity of marriage, capital punishment, and the grace of cohabitation. The reaction has been intense. Here to unpack it all, the Papal Posse is here. Robert Royal and Father Gerald Murray will join us for a segment you do not want to miss. The World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Dr. SEBASTIAN GORKA, Robert Royal, and Father Gerald Murray are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show or if you have a question, I'll be live tweeting throughout. Find me on Twitter at Raymond Arroyo, or you can email me at worldover@ewtn.com. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. The Trump versus Clinton presidential election began in earnest this week as the two major party candidates took direct aim at each other. No longer feeling the burn, Hillary Clinton on Tuesday ripped into Donald Trump's economic policies and his business experience. She warned Trump would send the U.S. economy back into recession.
We can't let him bankrupt America like we are one of his failed casinos. We can't let him roll the dice with our children's futures. Leading an economy as large and complex as ours, creating growth that is strong, fair, and lasting is about as hard a job as there is.
Meanwhile, a more scripted and disciplined Donald Trump took to the podium in New York on Wednesday, delivering the speech many Republicans had been awaiting.
As you know,
he unloaded on Mrs. Clinton.
People know she's a world-class liar. Her campaign slogan is, "I'm with her." You know what my response is to that? I'm with you, the American people.
Trump accused Clinton of personally profiting from her tenure at the State Department and savaged her foreign policy record.
Hillary Clinton's tryout for the presidency has produced one deadly foreign policy disaster after another. One by one, they're all bad.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump has promised to make religious liberty a top priority should he be elected. In a private meeting with Christian conservatives in New York, the likely Republican nominee said he would remove the ban against churches and other tax-exempt groups from fully participating in the political process. Under current law, tax-exempt groups cannot explicitly endorse candidates. Trump called religious liberty the #1 question. His appearance and comments earned him a standing ovation from the hundreds in attendance. Trump also promised to appoint pro-life Supreme Court justices. Marjorie Dannenfelser of the Susan B. Anthony list discussed Trump's comments at a post-event press conference.
And when he said several times today, pro-life Supreme Court justices, I don't know about you guys, but that's the first time I have ever heard a candidate use those words together in one sentence.
And Florida Senator Marco Rubio announced Wednesday he will run for re-election and defend his seat after all. It's a big departure for the former Republican presidential candidate who said repeatedly during the campaign that he would not run for Senate again. Rubio said he changed his mind in part because he believed no matter who is elected president, the Senate needs people willing to act as a check and balance on the excesses of the next president. Rubio's decision likely helps national Republicans in a critical seat they need to maintain their slim Senate majority. Polls show Rubio leading his possible Democratic challengers, while other Republicans trail him. Rubio must still clear the field of Republican challengers in an August primary. And a major defeat for President Barack Obama at the Supreme Court on immigration. In a 4-4 decision and without comment, the High Court on Thursday effectively let stand a lower court ruling that struck down the president's unilateral policy to officially defer the deportation of millions of people living in the U.S. illegally. The president called the decision heartbreaking, but said in so many words that the Supreme Court decision on deportation would have little effect.
Enforcement priorities developed by my administration are not affected by this ruling. This means that the people who might have benefited from the expanded deferred action policies, long-term residents raising children who are Americans or legal residents, they will remain low priorities for enforcement.
Immigration is sure to be a front-burner issue in this election season. And in a related story, Pope Francis offered another grand gesture to immigrants this week. During his Wednesday general audience in St. Peter's Square, the Pope spontaneously invited a dozen African migrants to join him on the steps of St. Peter's. Then, while surrounded by the migrants, the Pope called for all of Europe to welcome more of them, saying, "Please, they are our brothers. A Christian excludes no one. Let everyone come." The migrants were in Rome as guests of the Catholic charity Caritas Florence. From the very beginning of his pontificate, Pope Francis has repeatedly drawn attention to the plight of migrants and refugees from the Middle East. And marking the second anniversary of the fall of Mosul to the Islamic State, the two leading prelates in the region are calling on the international community and the Iraqi government to do more to help their people. Patriarch Joseph III Yunan of the Syriac Catholic Church and Patriarch Ignatius Afram II of the Syrian Orthodox Church issued a joint statement challenging the, quote, absence of serious actions to step up the liberation of Mosul and the villages of the Nineveh Plain. In addition to the millions under siege there, an estimated 500,000 have fled the region. The patriarchs rued the plight of those refugees as, quote, the wound of forced emigration, which is still bleeding. They did encourage the refugees to remain the shining lamp in the darkness of tribulation. On the battlefront, ISIS forces seem to be fraying. Last week, the terror group was overrun in Fallujah by U.S.-backed Iraqi forces. And in Mosul, ISIS publicly executed 4 of its commanders for refusing to fight. The executions are among 100 or so similar executions that have taken place in recent months as morale has reportedly fallen in ISIS strongholds. Meanwhile, Syrian President Bashar Assad is promising a new constitution to ensure equal rights for all citizens and eliminate discrimination toward religious minorities. Assad made the comments while meeting with several bishops from across Syria. He assured them that the new constitution will be thoroughly secular and removes all reference to religion, removing also the requirement that the head of the Syrian state be a professed Muslim. Assad also called on all players in the Middle East to oppose the jihadist ideology and the aggression by the Islamic State. In a related note, Maronite Catholic bishops are urging Christians to persevere in coexistence with Muslims and reject all international plans to partition Syria. And at long last, I want to announce some of the winners of the Will Wilder audio book contest. I asked you all to send me your favorite pictures of your readers enjoying the book. We received so many amazing submissions. Here are the winners: Joe Inzeo and family, Gloria Hitchcock, Brandon and Laura Bosch and their little baby, and Daniel Vonderhaar, who sent pics of his amazing Will Wilder book report, complete with pictures. Thanks for that. I love that so many of you are making Will part of your summer reading, and the Will Wilder, The Relic of Perilous Falls tour continues. I'll be in Santa Clara, California on Saturday, June 25th at the Elevate 2016 conference at the Santa Clara Marriott on Mission College Boulevard. I'm speaking in the afternoon and signing all my books. You folks in the Bay Area, come by. And on Wednesday, June 29th, I'll be in McLean, Virginia at the Tyson's Corner Barnes & Noble at 7 p.m., signing copies of Will Wilder and my other books. Get all the details at RaymondArroyo.com. When we return, what caused the Orlando shooter to kill 49 people in a nightclub earlier this month? Was it Islamic terror or a hate crime, or both? Author and counterterrorism expert Dr. Sebastian Gorka weighs in and tells us why it all matters when the world over continues. Stay right here.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. In the wake of the Orlando shooting, the investigation into the shooter's true motives continues, with the Justice Department this week taking the odd position of calling it both an act of terror and a hate crime. Does it matter? And how should the West respond to attacks like this one? My next guest is an internationally known expert on national security and counterterrorism. He's the Distinguished Chair of Military Theory at the Marine Corps University and author of the new book, Defeating Jihad, The Winnable War. Please welcome to the program, Dr. Sebastian Gorka. Great to have you here.
Great to be here. Thank you, Raymond.
Now, I want to play something for you. This is Loretta Lynch, Attorney General, on Face the Nation. Now, she's talking here about the focus of this investigation and that it's on the Orlando shooter, Omar Maten's true motivations. Listen to this.
We know that he apparently had some concerns or issues with the LGBT community. As I mentioned before, this is a community that is often targeted by acts of hate, and so we're very concerned about that issue as well. It was also Latin night.
Does it matter that it was Latin night, and is this the right emphasis?
To quote a famous science fiction film, the Attorney General is trying the old, "these are not the droids you're looking for" ploy. It's what we called in the Cold War maskirovka. It is diversion. It is talking about anything but the truth of why this man slaughtered 49 Americans. It has nothing to do with ethnic minorities or sexual preference or some kind of internal conflict with his own sexual identity. The man called up the 911 dispatcher as he was dispatching those people and said, "I am doing this for Islam, for the Islamic State." What more explanation do we need, Raymond?
Yeah, well, he called himself an Islamic soldier. He made the call in Arabic, which is not, he's Pakistani. That's not the tongue.
Afghan.
Afghan. But that's not the tongue of his people.
No, and not only that, he's saying Allahu Akbar. We know the witnesses heard him shout, "Allah is the greatest" in Arabic. He clearly used that phrase with the dispatcher, but even when the DOJ is caught red-handed in this crazy redaction, this Orwellian redaction, when they put the lines back in, they still refuse to use the Arabic and use Allah, and they say God. There is no end, no border to this fantasy land that they're trying to generate.
Well, Loretta Lynch spoke about the redaction. Initially, they redacted the transcript of the calls to the between the Orlando shooter and the police. They later decided to restore them. But listen to this explanation of why they redacted a part of that call.
We'll be releasing a partial transcript of the calls between the killer and the hostage negotiators so that people can, in fact, see the type of interaction that was had there. I say partial because we're not going to be, for example, broadcasting his pledges of allegiance.
Loretta Lynch's argument, the administration's position, is they don't want to be used as propaganda tools for ISIS. What's wrong with that?
We don't do that with real hate crimes, do we? I don't remember redactions of Christian extremists or people who are attacking anybody, whether it's the Family Research Council or somebody else. Why are we only doing it in this case, Raymond? Is that strange? It's strange to me. There seems to be a hidden agenda. And we're not empowering the bad guys or doing anything by talking about them as they talk about themselves. It's called reality.
And the failure to identify a religious motivation in your mind indicates what? It's clearly a failure, you believe, in the investigation.
It's a perpetuation of what we've seen for the last 7.5 years that my wife and I and a few others have been trying to call out from inside the government maelstrom, which which is there has been a systematic attempt to white out why terrorists do what they do. It cannot be about religion. It cannot be about jihadism. It has to be something else. We've heard the deputy spokeswoman for the Secretary of State say on national television, we will be safe, Raymond. There will be no more 9/11s if we have jobs for jihadis. It's just about, did you know it's all about economics?
No, they're acting out because they have nowhere else to go. So
other unemployed people do this all the time, don't they? They mow down people in nightclubs. I mean, this is the narrative. It's like Voldemort. You dare not speak his name, right? Islamic terrorism. You can't say it. Why? We didn't do that during World War II with fascism or Nazism. We didn't do it during the Cold War with communism. Why now?
Yeah. Well, here's my bigger question. You were involved in the Tsarnaev trial.
Yes.
You had brothers there that blew up people at a marathon. Why didn't we have navel-gazing and an in-depth investigation of perhaps the Tsarnaev brothers really hated joggers or long-distance runners or women in Nike shorts or I don't know what? It seems we're focusing on minutia and missing the connective tissue between these so-called random events or domestic terror events.
Exactly. So Raymond, I like to use a phrase from a friend of mine, Tom Jocelyn, who used this in testimony on the Hill. The narrative of the administration is a deliberate attempt to make the U.S. public disconnect the dots. This idea of lone wolves, this is absurd. There is a connective tissue, as you say, between 9/11, Fort Hood, the Boston bombing, San Bernardino, and Orlando. The connective tissue is the ideology of jihad.
Wow. I want to play, you mentioned Capitol Hill testimony.
Yes.
This, from Tuesday, is the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. They held a hearing to discuss ISIS ideology and its relation to the so-called lone wolf attackers. Now, this is Tarek El-Gawari. He is the director of the Religious Studies Program at the World Organization for Resource Development and Education. He testified, suggesting that ISIS has nothing to do with religion and Islam. Watch.
Extremist groups like ISIL have no interpretation whatsoever, nor do they have a fundamental understanding of Islam. They are unlettered warmongers who have, in essence, created a parallel religion. Yet this parallel religion that they call to is no more Islamic than a pool with one lemon squeezed in it is lemonade.
You buy that?
No, because I've read the Quran. This individual should read chapter 9, verse 29. He should read chapter 9, verse 5, that says, when the holy months are past, hunt down and besiege the infidel with every stratagem of war, and if they do not convert, kill them. Now, that's actually meant to be the word of God from the Quran. Has he read it? Has this individual read that? That's an exhortation from the Creator.
Well, this is one of the things you point out in your book, Defeating Jihad. There are texts from generals with explicit instruction, particularly to those who live in non-Muslim societies. Tell us a bit about that. What insight are we missing here? What is the missing piece for Americans and Europeans looking in to understand about the ideology that drives these people to act out even against their own neighbors?
Right. So if poverty or lack of education were the root cause of terrorism, then half of India would be terrorists. They're not. So what's missing?
Right.
The catalyst, the ideology, whether you're a Marxist, whether you're a fascist, a member of the KKK, or a jihadi. So in this case, we must understand the ideology. And my book is an attempt to do what we call enemy threat doctrine analysis. You have to look at the sources of the strategy. And there are some key Clausewitzes, Napoleons, if you will, of jihad. And I list them and I go through their main writings. And these are documents that we have found on high-value targets everywhere, in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, and, as somebody who worked on the Boston bombing trial, on the hard drive of the younger brother. Wow. 2,000 pages of jihadi documents. This is not crazy people. These are individuals that have a plan. It's been laid down for the last 70 years, worked out by strategists, and they are following it. And ISIS aren't crazy people. They have a plan, and they've reestablished the caliphate.
What is the answer here? You suggest counter-propaganda. How do you do that?
Right. So the answer is twofold. Once we get politics and political correctness out of the threat assessment, we have to empower our Sunni Muslim allies. They must be the face of this war. The people who are dying the most. I mean, they will kill Christians, Yazidis, but the majority of the victims are actually Sunni Muslims. And then lastly, the propaganda campaign, delegitimize the brand. The same way we did with communism, delegitimize this brand of global jihadism.
There seems to be a focus on the Hill, Dr. Gorka. And their focus is guns. Guns are out of control. There are too many guns. That's what's fueling and driving this violence. We just saw a series of gun control measures fail in the Senate on Monday. So rebellious Democrats disrupted the House's legislative work on Wednesday, staging a nearly 26-hour sit-in on the House floor. This is Representative John Lewis of Georgia. Listen.
We have turned deaf ears to the blood of the innocent and the concern of our nation. We are blind to a crisis. Mr. Speaker, where is the heart of this body? Where is our soul? We are calling on the leadership of the House to bring common sense gun control legislation to the House floor.
Now, in the middle of this sit-in, Representative Louis Gohmert of Texas came out, and he confronted these House Democrats, suggesting that radical Islam is what killed these people, not the gun. It was the perpetrator, not the gun itself, that killed them. Look at this. Just watch this.
Radical Islam killed these poor people.
No fly, no gun. No fly, no gun. No fly, no gun. No fly, no gun.
You watch this and you think what?
God bless Louis Gohmert. That's what I think. Just one point. Do the Democrats realize that making improvised explosive devices out of pressure cookers is illegal in America? I mean, totally and utterly illegal. Did that stop the Boston bombers? You can ban every gun in America. That will not solve the problem. Jihadis will still come to kill the infidel. This is, again, displacement reaction. It's diversionary. They cannot admit their strategy has failed, and therefore they have to focus on inanimate objects, the NRA and Donald Trump. This is their response.
And yet you even have church leaders coming out, and a lot of them have come out. The bishops have come out and said, time for gun control. It is time for gun control measures. You're a Catholic, you look at that and think what?
Feel-good measures that will make no difference. I understand it. There's a kind of intuitive seductiveness to it because it's easy. Ooh, I can solve this problem by banning an inanimate object. It's the soul. It's the heart of the human. What do they wish to do? Do they wish to destroy us in the name of their God? Because if they do, it doesn't matter what you do with guns. They will come and destroy us. Al-Qaeda has a magazine called Inspire. One of the earliest issues has a giant photograph of a pickup truck that says, use your F-150 to kill the infidel.
Wow.
They'll just use a pickup truck. They'll use a brick. They'll use a knife. It's not the gun.
There was an interfaith iftar on World Refugee Day this week, and Secretary of State John Kerry had this to say about the threat of refugees. There's new focus now on refugees, given these flashpoints of violence we're seeing all over the world. Watch.
There is absolutely no evidence, my friends, zero evidence, that refugees who make it through this arduous process pose any greater threat to our society than the members of any other group. And it is important for people to know that.
Okay. Dr. Gorka, given your experience, what you know about what you're seeing around the world, is that true?
He needs to get off his yacht. The Brussels attackers, the Paris attackers, we know that they used fake, false Syrian passports to claim refugee status to enter Europe. What is this man talking about? ISIS has said in their propaganda statements, we will and we are using the refugee streams to attack the West. It's unconscionable. It's shameful.
Yeah. And there's a letter today. Ted Cruz and Jeff Sessions released this, a report. Among the 580 convicted of terror plots, at least 380 of them were foreign-born. There's also been a surge in cases since 2014, with at least 131 more suspects found 40 of the people, at least 40 of the people initially admitted into the U.S. as refugees later were convicted or implicated in terror cases, and that's only the backlog.
Right. Your viewers need to be aware. We wrote a report recently, a week before San Bernardino. If you do the numbers, this recent attack in Orlando, this is the 103rd individual in the United States linked to ISIS who has plotted or executed an attack. This isn't an unusual thing. 103 in 2 years. The threat is here, the threat is real. Whatever the Democrats would like to do to wish it away, Americans are in danger, and it will continue.
There is a natural heart that people have for refugees escaping this war-torn disaster in the Middle East, particularly Syria and Iraq. What is your advice? I mean, you can't apply a religious litmus test. Some are saying, you know, we're going to keep all the Muslims out, we're going to keep all this group out. You can't do that. What do you do? What should we be doing as a government? What aren't we doing?
Raymond, my parents were refugees, so this is very close to my heart. They were interrogated for weeks on end to prove their bona fides. When the FBI director says we cannot vet individuals coming from war zones, forget a litmus test. I mean, how many Americans would pass a test for being a Christian? It's absurd, okay? So, number one, common sense. Do not admit, for the time being, individuals from active war zones where jihadis are operating who we cannot vet. That's just common sense. We're a Christian nation. Help those who can be helped, but not in a suicide pact. That's
what do you do when you've got an EU, borderless EU, they're streaming through? Germany admitted 1 million refugees last year. Those people are free to wander wherever they'd like in Europe. They've got, presumably, European passports now. How do you keep them out of the United States?
Well, this is a huge problem because I'm not sure they get instantly European citizenship, but they may have passage documents, or UN or EU passage documents. The real problem is the visa waiver program. That is a real Achilles heel. I was a British national, I'm now an American. When I came to America, I just had to fill out a form on the plane and I walked into America. This is a huge problem. Common sense must be applied, and the EU has to wake up to this issue. If you're a bad guy, you will exploit the refugee crisis. It's just common sense.
Dr. Sebastian Gorka, thank you so much for being
Thank you so much.
here. Dr. Gorka's new book, Defeating Jihad, The Winnable War, is available now at bookstores everywhere and online. You can also follow Dr. Gorka on his website, thegorkabriefing.com. When we return, Pope Francis has again inspired conversation and controversy with his reflections on everything from marriage to the death penalty this week. Robert Royal and Father Jerry Murray, the Papal Posse, join us to weigh in when the world over continues. Don't miss this.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. In a series of appearances over the last week or so, Pope Francis made pronouncements that have generated headlines and controversy all over the world, in Catholic and secular circles alike. His opinions on everything from the validity of Christian marriage to cohabitation to the death penalty have set tongues a-wagging. Well, tonight we decided to ask, what is Pope Francis really saying, and what does it mean? I reconvened the Papal Posse earlier. Robert Royal, editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org, and Father Gerald Murray of the Archdiocese of New York joined me right here in Washington. Watch. I want to start with something the Pope said. He spoke at the opening of the Pastoral Conference of the Diocese of Rome. Now, this was from June 16th, and he made some interesting observations about the validity of Christian marriages and cohabitation. Here's what he had to say. It's provisional, and because of this, the great majority of our sacramental marriages are null, because they say yes for the rest of their life, but they don't know what they are saying, because they have a different culture. They say it, they have goodwill, but they don't know. Father Gerald Murray, your reaction to that as a canonist. This is at odds with the traditional church teaching on marriage and the nature of that commitment and vow.
Yes, the great majority of Catholic marriages are not null. They're valid. For the Pope to say that is to express, I think, an unacceptable opinion. I regret he did it because it causes uncertainty among people now. Is my marriage valid? The Pope is not following the canonical precision that's present in the law about what it takes to get married. In order to be married validly, you simply have to know that this is a relationship between a man and a woman in view of having children, and by nature, it's a permanent relationship. You don't have to know all of the ups and downs that are facing you in married life. In fact, that's one of the things God prevents us from knowing
I was
the
about
future,
to say,
which is a blessing.
Yeah, if we saw the future, you know, how many people would probably enter in? Who knows?
Exactly, but it's not impossible to get married, and in fact, the Pope has a very pessimistic view, I think, of this generation and their ability to understand the commitment of marriage. I strongly disagree with him, and I would love to have a conversation with him to say, Holy Father, there's more to this than you're saying.
Now, Robert Royal, some people are hearing what Father Jerry Murray is saying, and they might go, wait a minute, this is the Pope saying this. Who does Father Jerry Murray or Robert Royal or Raymond Royal think they are to even question this? You would say what?
Well, I would say that there's a departure from the tradition here, and so for him to say this is, I would even go a little bit further. I would say it's rather reckless, because at this moment in history where we all admit that there's a point to what he's saying, that in a way people who are married are in a very fragile situation. There are any number of influences in culture that you know are mitigating factors. But to put this out there in such a broad way, and he initially said the vast majority of people are in invalid marriages. This, in a way, sends a paradoxical message that, you know, if you're not happy or, you know, you see somebody else you're interested in, there's a way out from this. And it just seems to me, and I think a lot of people, after hearing that, people who, like us, I think all three of us, respect the office of the Pope, respect the Holy Father as a person, hear that, and I think a line kind of was crossed here. You began to hear people say that it was preposterous. Edward Peters, the great American canon lawyer, said that it's preposterous to put forward that the vast majority or even a large number of marriages are null because the culture is bad. Well, you know, the early Christians were in a culture that was pretty sexually saturated, and marriage was sort of a very light thing, and yet
most of these people didn't read anything. They were illiterate.
And yet they were able to live a Christian life in a very paganized, masculine-dominated culture. So this is very troubling, and I think it's had a very widespread reaction against what he said.
Father Jerry, I want you to react to this. Later in the same address, the Pope had this to say about some couples who may be properly disposed to the sacrament of matrimony. There are boys and girls who are immensely pure and have a great love, but there are few of them. There are good young people in today's culture, but they have to be guided until they are mature enough. That is when the sacrament is celebrated with joy. It takes a lot of patience without getting scared. What do you make of that?
Again, I don't agree with the Pope. I think most people are naturally capable of marriage, and the fact that you are 18 years old doesn't per se mean you're immature as regards being able to marry. Historically, marriage occurs much earlier in European history. Now we're more later in general in the 20s and 30s, but this exaggerated notion that the Pope has, in my opinion, that people are unprepared and incapable of marrying because of a lack of maturity, I don't agree. I would agree with the Pope that we need good marriage preparation courses, but what you need to know to get married is very simple. Boy, girl, ring, vows, and you consummate the marriage, you're married.
But he's saying here, there are very few people who are pure. You have to start there. It's almost as if he's taking into account what's happening in the culture, and he's saying, look, we've got to kind of lower the bar a bit here and expect less from these people. There are not that many who are, you know, virgins when the process begins.
Well, you know, the circumstances the church deals with is reality, but the reality is God didn't make it so difficult that your average 20-year-old can't get married validly in the church. You just have to know what marriage is and intend it. Now, we need to help people to appreciate the depths and wisdom of theology, but we shouldn't say, you're too young, you can't get married in the church, wait a while. That's not the right message.
Robert Royal, when you saw this, it was issued in an official transcript by the Vatican, but parts of the address had been changed. Some said it was a retraction of what the Pope had said, because in the translation, or rather the transcript, it said, not the vast majority of marriages are invalid, but many are invalid. There were some adjustments throughout the text. Concerning, or is that within the purview of the Vatican? Is that done all the time?
Well, it's not done all the time. I think it's a good thing, of course, that the Vatican, somewhere in the Vatican, it penetrated that this caused a firestorm around the world for many of the reasons that Father just mentioned. But look, marriage, there's the old joke. I took him for better or for worse, but he was worse than I took him for. What happens in marriage, as we all know, is you grow. You mature precisely because you've made that commitment. And particularly for men, it's important. Women tend to mature a little bit earlier, even in our culture, but particularly it's important for men to make a commitment and then learn to be a husband, a father, a grandfather. I mean, that's the life experience, that's the life education that we all go through.
And it's an ongoing commitment. I was a bit struck by the fact that it seems as if it's a one-shot deal. You make the vow 25 years ago, and well, that's it. No, it's a constant renewal of that vow every day, every moment. Being with your wife, growing with her and this family. There doesn't seem to be that kind of perspective here at play.
Well, your marriage is established at a moment, the moment you exchange the vows, but you do have to renew that vow in a real living sense by being faithful to it.
Right.
To introduce the notion that the majority of Catholic marriages are invalid and therefore how can you be faithful to what doesn't exist? This poses a lot of problems. It's not the real case. The Church has never considered that the vast majority of Catholic marriages are invalid. If there is a specific cause why you think your marriage is invalid, by all means go to the tribunal, get the evidence together and investigate it. But a sweeping statement like this, I think, as Bob said, they walked back partially because they understood this was a landmine that exploded.
Still exploded, nonetheless.
Yeah, it did explode.
The Pope also made some controversial comments at this same event, and they touched on cohabitation. Frankly, this has not gotten much publicity, but these were more inflammatory in some ways than the earlier comments. He said, they prefer to cohabitate, talking about couples. And this is a challenge, a task, not to ask, why don't you marry? No, to accompany, to wait, and to help them to mature, help fidelity to mature. I've seen a lot of fidelity in these cohabitations, and I am sure that this is a real marriage. They have the grace of a real marriage because of their fidelity. Robert Royal.
Yeah, see, I think this fits into a pattern that we know about this Pope already, that he's trying to bring people back into the Church who are somewhat alienated, and he's trying to not set the bar too high so that he can try to welcome and accompany all. But in a case like this, you're treading on very dangerous ground, because what you're saying is, well, look, you're cohabiting, but it's not really that bad, and we're not going to insist on anything. We're going to, we'll work with you. And again, this sends out the message. It's very odd that on the one hand, the people who are married are told, probably you're not really married, and the people who are cohabiting, I see elements of fidelity there, and those are marriages. It's as if the culture, the sexual revolution of the culture, is recalibrating the Church at both ends.
Father Jerry Murray.
No, I actually went back and watched the videotape of that part of the whole talk, but that part of the talk concerned a custom that he knew in northeastern Argentina. He said where people would come together, they'd have a child, and when it came time to send the child to school, then they get married civilly. And then he said when they become grandparents, it's only then that they get married in the Church. And for the Pope to say that that's a real marriage, anything before they get married in church, it's just not accurate. Catholics are bound to be married according to the law of the Church. If you're not married, you're not getting the grace of the sacrament, and you're not in a real marriage.
And yet he says here, you shouldn't ask, why don't you marry? Which, that's what blew my head. I mean, forget the latter part of the sentence, but you don't ask, why don't you marry? You have a child. Why wouldn't you ask?
Of course. And look, pastoral charity demands truth. The pretend world is you're not in a real marriage, we're going to act like you are. I don't hope the Pope's not endorsing that, but if he is, I'd say, Holy Father, let's talk about this and come back, because I, as a pastor, I get people coming in all the time wanting to be married. And if they're living together, I say, look, you can't stay living together if you're going to ask God to bless your marriage. You have to separate, live chastely until your marriage. Why anticipate the state you're trying to get into? It doesn't make any sense. So if you tell everybody in the world, look, a lot of people cohabiting in real marriages. That's not something good.
Right. I mean, and that's the Pope's words are, there's fidelity. I've seen a lot of fidelity in these cohabitations, and I'm sure that this is a real marriage. They have the grace of real marriage because of their fidelity. Can you have fidelity for someone you're not vowed to?
If you haven't given the vows before God, then there is no vow to be faithful.
There's no marriage.
Right,
no vow to be faithful to a
And
marriage.
A vow made before a civil official is subject to the laws of the state, which permit divorce. So it's not a conditionless vow as it is in the church.
What have you heard as a journalist that people turn to globally? People turn to you. You're in contact with folks all over the world. What's been the reaction to these statements?
Well, I mean, I've never seen anything like this. I think this really reaches a new level of consternation about what's coming out from Rome, where you see people. I mean, he says at one point there that the priests shouldn't stick their noses into the moral lives of the people. And this, I mean, this is virtually to say that the church cannot counsel people about what they're to do in their immoral lives. But I hear from people very strange reactions like this. Why do we stop then with marriage? Why is that the only sacrament that the culture has rendered invalid? Why not ordination to the priesthood?
Right.
You know, are confessions invalid? Are communions invalid because the culture has warped people's? Once you start to go down this road, there's no guardrail. I mean, we understand that the Pope is trying to be welcoming and he's trying to open the doors as wide as he possibly can. But there is a danger in this direction that in opening the doors, you lose the substance of what the faith is there to teach.
Mm-hmm. I want to share something very quickly with you. The Pope was asked by a person in the audience what was referred to as double morality regarding official church teaching and pastoral practice towards divorced and remarried Catholics and the sacraments. He made the point that neither rigorism, so a strict interpretation of the law, or laxity were the right approaches. Instead, the Pope offered this. He said, the gospel chooses another way, welcoming, accompanying, integrating, discerning, without putting our nose into the moral life of other people. Father Jerry, as a pastor, you hear that and think what? Should you not ask the questions about, are you cohabitating? Has that child been baptized? Is that sticking your nose into other people's moral lives?
I don't think so. You know, the expression sticking your nose in is usually meaning mind your own business and don't have anything to do with what's happening in another person's life. If a person's coming to seek a priest, they're not there because they want the priest to know gossip. They want to know, what does Jesus expect of me? Remember what Jesus told Peter, get behind me, Satan. He didn't say, let's have a 10-minute discussion to find out why you think otherwise. He said, stop thinking that way. The way you think as man thinks, not as God thinks. We have to understand the gospel is tough love with a divine origin. That's what we have in the gospel. When I challenge a couple who's living together to not fornicate before they marry, I'm doing them a favor because I'm telling them, if you're going to ask God to bless your marriage, you have to say, and I value your law too, Lord. Therefore, I'm going to live it as best I can before the marriage.
Right.
That's, if I'm sticking my nose in there, as the Pope says, that's what I want to do because I want to help them find the way to heaven, not reinforce this notion, whatever you want to do, that's good for you.
I want both of your reactions to the comment the Pope made, almost in passing. He said, when he finished this address, okay, now don't go tell Cardinal Muller on me, who is the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, the doctrinal officer at the Vatican. What did you make of that? Why did he say that?
Well, I think he was trying to make a little joke. I watched again the tape and I saw people laughed at it. He actually said it sort of in the middle of the whole presentation. But I'm upset about it because Cardinal Muller works for him. Cardinal Muller's there to help him in his mission to teach the authentic purity of Catholic doctrine. And to make a joke out of it, like I'm saying stuff that I think Cardinal Muller won't agree with. Well, if that's the case, don't say it. Check with Muller beforehand and then come back and give a better presentation. Because, quite frankly, Cardinal Muller shouldn't be the butt of jokes. He's there to help exactly what the Pope needs. You know, Jesus said, strengthen your brethren. And one of the ways the Pope does by teaching the truth.
This was really a humdinger of a speech, Robert. In the middle of the talk, the Pope also made reference to priests who, in his estimation, in the Pope's recreation of events, he said, if you have a couple who are not married and they bring their child to baptism, there are priests who won't baptize these children. They're animals, he said. These animals, he referred to them as. How do you process all this? How do you put this together? The Muller joke, the animal comment, what's happening here?
Look, there are two people on the whole face of the earth who have to be careful about every word that they say. One is the President of the United States, because what he says or doesn't say could set off a nuclear war or, all sorts of cascading events. And the other is the Pope of Rome. And for some reason, the Holy Father seems to think that he can kind of freelance these things, especially, I mean, these are deep theological and moral theology questions and questions that have a long history in our church. And he says these things in a way that I think he thinks he's engaging people and that people need to be engaged in our world. But there also is this little bit of worry when he refers to the chief theologian, the chief official theologian in the church, and says, don't say this, because he knows that he's stepped into a field that has lots of technicalities and lots of unintended consequences. And for a pope to speak seemingly to demote marriage as it exists and to elevate cohabitation as it exists, and on, this sends out shockwaves that are just incalculable.
I saw a lot of articles that came out in the last week really apologizing for these comments, saying, no, it's not what you think. It's really not bad at all. In fact, this has been said long ago in the last exhortation on the family. They made basically the same point. The church fathers thought as well that the culture has changed the nature of what marriage is, and we have to look at this anew. Is that satisfying to you?
Not really, because, on this animal question, for instance, I checked the Vatican transcript in Italian says, the Pope said, as if they were animals, referring to the children. The priests are treating them as if they were animals. The Pope actually said they were animals. He was referring to the priests. The priests,
not the children.
Yeah, not the children. And then immediately he starts going to critique of rigorism. Now, I happen to agree with him. Just because your child is born out of wedlock doesn't mean it should be denied baptism. In fact, I would favor baptizing almost all of the children.
Exactly.
Other factors have to enter into. Is it going to be raised a Catholic and all this? But for the Pope to get really very personally angry at some priest, that's not good. I'm a priest. You know what? I make mistakes. I don't want to be called an animal if I make a mistake. I'd rather be called in and said, look, we do it this way. This is the reason. Let's change. I think he let his temper get him there, and that's unfortunate, as Bob said, because people pay attention.
Yeah. Well, I want to shift gears for a moment. I want to talk about one other thing that was mentioned on Saturday, June 18th. The Pope paid a visit to the Villa Nazareth University College in Rome. And it was a meeting with students. He was talking about the use of the word genocide in reference to Christians in the Middle East and what's happening to them. He said, I don't like it. I wish to make this very clear. When some refer to what is happening to Christians in the Middle East as a genocide, this is reductionism. Let us not turn a mystery of the faith, a form of martyrdom, into sociological reductionism. What is the impact of those statements, Robert Royal? When we have even the United States State Department, after much pulling and dragging by folks like the Knights of Columbus and Nina Shea and us and many others, they finally described this officially as a genocide.
Right.
What happens when the Pope says something like that?
I mean, first of all, when the State Department defines something as a genocide, then all sorts of legal things begin to happen.
Correct.
Genocides need to be responded to, and the U.S. government is obligated in certain treaties to respond to genocide. I think what's happening here, because in other contexts, he's actually called it a genocide.
Right. In Latin America. In Latin America, wait, I have the note right here. A year ago, on a visit to Latin America, he said, today we are dismayed to see how in the Middle East and elsewhere in the world, many of our brothers and sisters are persecuted, tortured, and killed for their faith in Jesus. This too needs to be denounced in this third world war, waged piecemeal, which we are now experiencing, a form of genocide. I insist on the word is taking place and it must end. A year ago, he was calling it genocide.
And I think,
why the about face?
See, I think what he's doing now is he's hoping that he can kind of tamp down the Western Muslim conflict, because to call this a genocide, as I say, even in secular terms, there are reactions that take place. Now, I hope that that's what he meant. I hope that what is sort of on the spur of the moment, what he wanted to emphasize is that this is really a martyrdom. But look, it's simply the fact that Christians in the Middle East survived since the very beginning of Islam. They lived for 1,300 years, more or less, reasonably with whatever Islamic powers existed. It's only now, in the last several decades, that those historic Christian populations in Lebanon, in Syria, and in Iraq are being driven away. Not necessarily killed, not martyred, but being driven away. So there's something specifically here that he was willing to recognize at one point. And I hope the only reason for the shift in the language is that he wants to raise up yet again the religious dimension so it does not get lost in just sort of a international politics.
Father Jerry?
I'd say it's both genocide and martyrdom. I mean, the terms are not exclusive of each other. But I think we have to highlight the fact that the West's fight against ISIS has been rather ineffectual, and recognizing reality for what it is part of our mission. I mean, we should clearly say Christians are being killed precisely because they're Christian. This is not a political thing. This is a religious warfare being carried out by ISIS, targeting people of other religions. So it is what it is.
Let's step back for a moment in our remaining minutes. Your take on all of this together. What should people take away? How should they contextualize these comments of the Pope? For many, many people, a friend of mine, he opened up the New York Times. There's a half-page article about the cohabitation that he's now engaged in. And he says, is there a place I can go? Is there a priest in New York, of all places, where I can go have my relationship blessed? It seems the Pope is warming to people who are trying to be faithful like me. That's what he said. I hope I'm not violating a confidence here, but he doesn't watch the show. It's okay. But your response to people like him and the average Catholic trying to make sense of this?
Well, it always goes back to the gospel and Jesus Christ. If you can stand before Jesus Christ and say, my cohabitation is a holy thing, then I'm going to say, reread the gospel. It's not the case. The Pope and his charities trying to steer people in some directions. I disagree with some of his analysis, obviously. But we should never give people the false notion that, number one, sin is good, or number two, the sacraments are ineffectual because we live in a troubled culture. And number three, we should always say what is true yesterday is true today and tomorrow. We can't change the Church's teaching. We don't want to do it. That's my reaction.
But before I let you react, there's one bite I forgot to play, and that is on Tuesday, the Pope talking about the death penalty. He delivered this video message to a conference being held in Oslo, Norway, making his position on the matter very clear. Here's what he says. Nowadays, the death penalty is unacceptable. However grave the crime of the convicted person, it is an offense to the inviolability of life and to the dignity of the human person. It likewise contradicts God's plan for individuals and society and his merciful justice. Nor is it consonant with any just purpose of punishment. It does not render justice to victims, but instead fosters vengeance. The commandment, thou shalt not kill, has absolute value and applies both to the innocent and to the guilty. Robert Royal.
Well, let me repeat myself. This is preposterous. I mean, if you see somebody about to murder an innocent person, and the only thing you can do is to kill that person to protect someone, you have a moral obligation. It's not only that it's wrong to kill that person, you have an obligation to protect the innocent. And this has been the constant teaching of the Church forever. Ever since the Church had the ability to speak in the public square.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't this imply that every soldier, every fighting man and woman fighting for their country who has to kill to protect their country or the liberty of their people, they're all sinners then, right?
Look, we know that in recent papacies, including John Paul II and Benedict XVI, there has been a move, especially in Europe, the view that capital punishment is something that we should no longer apply. But both of them said, look, there are occasions. This isn't an absolute prohibition. It isn't always wrong to apply capital punishment if a particular society, for some reason, is not able to protect itself by, lifetime in prison or whatever the alternative might be. But this, I think this is part and parcel of this over-the-top rhetoric that we see with this Pope, where his charitable disposition, his desires so that, that this sinner will have a chance to repent in this life. I mean, the old teaching was, well, you're going to be executed 6 months down the line and get right with God because, you've put yourself outside the
It was the soul that the Church was focused on. Father Gerald Murray, your response.
Yeah, paragraph 2267 of the Catechism of the Catholic Church is Catholic teaching, where it says it is not illegitimate for civil authorities in some cases, once you establish the crime and the identity of the criminal, to use capital punishment. Well, that's going to protect innocent human lives. The retribution that's part of punishment is also a value in Catholic theology. Retribution prevents vengeance. Vengeance is when private citizens take violence against offenders. Retribution is when the civil authority establishes order by saying, he who sheds the blood of man, by man will his blood be shed. And it's very important that we enunciate this teaching, because otherwise, any other teaching of the past is subject to reconsideration if we don't find it amenable to the current way of looking at things. Capital punishment is in Catholic teaching, period.
But from John Paul on, we have seen this, as Robert mentioned, a sort of contraction in the Church's appetite and the public acceptance and comfort with capital punishment. But that shouldn't change the theology, should it?
No, and that's the question here, because Pope John Paul II said the cases where this is the only remedy are not. That's a value judgment on current penal practices and legal arrangements and all. You can debate that.
Right.
But the theology has to remain the same. Otherwise, capital punishment's in the Old Testament. The Jewish people were given by God the commandment to kill certain people for certain crimes. Now, the old law is no longer applicable as regards all those listed crimes, but the punishment still remains, because if it was moral back then, it's moral now. It has to be that way.
Yeah, fascinating discussion. Robert Royal, Father Gerald Murray, what would I do without the Papal Posse? I'm sure we will mount up very soon again. Thank you both for being here. You can read much more of Robert Royal's writings, as well as Father Jerry's, on thecatholicthing.org. And of course, Father Gerald, thank you for the Archdiocese allowing you a day pass to come see us.
Great to come down to D.C.
Great to see you all. Thank you. Well, that is all the time we have. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook. Follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com and so much more. You can also sign up for my free e-blast there. Join us next week. Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions will be here to talk presidential politics and much more. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.